Everyone got a Christmas gift. My dad said, his voice calm and cutting, the kind that carried through the room, even over the sound of clinking glasses. Then he looked right at me and added, "Except the loser." Forced laughter filled the room. My brother Mark smirked. My mother looked away, pretending to fuss with the gravy. And me, I just sat there smiling so hard my jaw ached. Because this time I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to give them what they expected. This year I had my own kind of gift, one they'd never see coming. I remember the way the lights flickered that night, golden perfect, staged like every other Turner family Christmas. My parents loved appearances. The porcelain dishes, the silver napkin rings, the smell of pine-scented candles, and perfectly baked pie. Everything had to look good, even when nothing really was. I used to love Christmas when I was a kid. Back then, I still believed that the gifts under the tree meant something. If I worked hard, got good grades, and made my dad proud, maybe he'd look at me the way he looked at Mark. But every year was the same story. My brother got admiration, I got reminders. Mark, the golden child, had everything handed to him before he even asked. Dad called him the future of the Turner legacy. The legacy being Turner Construction, the family business my grandfather built from the ground up. When Mark joined the company after college, Dad gave him a corner office and a team of 20. When I suggested new software to modernize the system, Dad said, "We don't need gimmicks. We need discipline." So I stopped suggesting. I stopped expecting it. At 28, I left home and never looked back, not until now. This year was supposed to be different. Not for them. For me. I wasn't the same boy who left with a duffel bag and a bruised ego. I was the CEO of HelixShare, a digital platform I'd built from my apartment, one that had grown into an empire worth more than I'd ever imagined. Forbes called me the quiet billionaire. Dad still called me the disappointment. When I walked into that house on Christmas Eve, I told myself I was just visiting, not proving anything. I even brought gifts. Real ones. Thoughtful ones. A signed baseball for Mark, whose college dream was to play pro. A bracelet for Mom engraved with the coordinates of her childhood home. And for Dad, a bottle of 1985 Merlot, the same year he'd started Turner Construction. I didn't expect him to thank me. I just wanted to show that I remembered. But the moment I stepped into that dining room, I could tell nothing had changed. Dad sat at the head of the table as always, commanding attention without trying. Mom fluttered between dishes, smiling too wide. Mark was already pouring wine, wearing the same smug grin he'd perfected since high school. His fiancée Claire gave me a polite nod, the kind of look reserved for someone you've heard too much about and wish you hadn't. Eli, Dad said, feigning surprise. "You made it." "I did," I replied. "Wouldn't miss the annual performance." Mom's laugh was sharp, still sarcastic. "I see. Still observant," I said back. Dinner began as usual, polite chatter, inside jokes. I wasn't part of laughter that felt rehearsed. I picked at my food, listening to Dad brag about Mark's new deal, the one he'd supposedly negotiated all by himself. I knew the truth. The client had come from one of my early contracts before Dad told me to stop wasting time with computers. Then came the gift exchange. It was always Dad's ritual. He stood by the tree, handing out boxes and envelopes, making speeches before each one. "This one's for Mark," he said, pulling out a long velvet box. "A token for your hard work, custom-made cufflinks with the company crest." Mark grinned, already knowing. "For Claire." Dad continued, "A little sparkle for our soon-to-be daughter-in-law." She gasped at the diamond earrings. Mom dabbed her eyes like it was a Hallmark movie. "For your mother," he said, handing her a jewelry box. "Because she keeps this house and this family shining." Applause, kisses, clinking glasses, then silence. I waited. The only unclaimed space under the tree was the small spot right beside my feet. Dad looked around the room, pretending to count. He said finally, his voice dripping with amusement. "Looks like that's everyone." Mom blinked uneasy. "William?" He cut her off. "Oh, right," he said, smiling at me. "Everyone got a gift except the loser." Mark chuckled under his breath. Claire looked down, pretending not to hear. Mom froze, eyes darting between us. And me, I didn't flinch. I just leaned back, smiled, and said, "That's okay, Dad. I actually brought something for myself this year." He frowned, unsure where I was going. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded magazine, the latest Forbes issue. I placed it gently on the table, face up. My name bold on the cover, Eli Turner, the tech rebel who built a billion-dollar empire. The room went still. Mark stopped mid-sip. Claire's fork clattered against her plate. Mom covered her mouth. Dad just stared, eyes fixed on the headline, hands tightening around his glass. "That's quite the photo," I said, breaking the silence. They wanted me to pose in front of the Helix Share offices, but I told them I preferred something more humble. His hand slipped. The glass fell shattering against the floor. Red wine bled across the white tablecloth, a sudden violent stain that stole all the light. No one moved. For a moment, all I could hear was the soft hiss of the fireplace and my own heartbeat. Then I spoke again calmly. "I guess I didn't need a gift this year," I said. "Turns out I already have one." Dad's voice was barely a whisper. "You built this?" "Yes," I said simply, "from nothing. The company you said was a fad, the waste of time that would never amount to anything." Mark looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "You're serious?" I nodded. "Dead serious. We just hit a 9-figure valuation. I have 300 employees, offices in New York, Austin, and Seattle." Mom's voice cracked. "Eli, why didn't you tell us? Because I said you wouldn't have listened." The truth hung there heavy and undeniable. I stood pushing my chair back slowly. "Merry Christmas," I said, my tone steady. "I think that's enough family tradition for one night." As I walked past my father, he reached out not to stop me but just to touch my sleeve. His hand trembled. "I didn't mean it," he said softly. That night I met his eyes. "You did. And that's okay. It's probably the best thing you ever said to me." I left the room without another word. Behind me, the murmurs started confusion, guilt, maybe even respect. But I didn't stay to find out. Outside, the cold air hit my face sharp and clean. I stood on the porch watching the snow fall over the old Turner house, the same one that used to make me feel small. Not tonight. Tonight, I felt infinite. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't anger at success served cold under the soft glow of Christmas lights. The drive back from my parents' house was quiet. Snow streaked across the windshield, catching the red taillights of the car ahead, a blurred, frantic crimson against the night. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, but inside something churned, not anger exactly, but the echo of years. I told myself it didn't matter anymore. I'd built something on my own. I didn't need their approval or their respect or their dinners full of staged perfection. Still, I couldn't stop hearing his voice. "Everyone got a gift except the loser." The line sat in my chest like a stone. When I got back to the city, my apartment felt colder than usual. It wasn't the kind of cold that comes from the winter. It was the kind that seeps from memories. I turned on the lights, dropped my coat, and glanced at the Forbes magazine still folded in my bag. My face stared back, confident, distant, unbothered. A lie in print. The truth, I was tired. Success felt like armor I'd welded shut, built on a lifetime of trying to prove something. A knock at the door pulled me back. Clara stepped inside, cheeks pink from the wind. She'd stayed behind that night, unwilling to join the circus. When she saw my face, she sighed. It happened again, didn't it? I didn't have to answer. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around me. "You don't have to keep proving them wrong, Eli. You already did." "I know," I said quietly, "but part of me still wants to." She pulled back and looked me in the eyes. "Then prove them wrong by being happy. That's the one thing they'll never understand." I wanted to believe her. We sat on the couch, the city glowing outside our window. I told her about the dinner, every detail: Dad's smirk, Mark's laugh, the wine glass hitting the floor. She didn't interrupt, just listened the way people do when they've seen every version of your pain and still choose to stay. When I finished, she said, "You didn't walk out of that house defeated. You walked out free." Free, I repeated. I don't feel free. I feel hollow. That's what happens when the noise stops, she said softly. You've been running on anger for so long you don't know what silence feels like yet. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. You make it sound poetic. It's not poetry, Eli. It's healing. That night, long after she fell asleep, I sat at my desk staring at the Helix Share dashboard. Thousands of users' active stock climbing partnerships pending. Numbers everywhere, proof of success. But none of them felt like peace. My father had once told me, business is about power, not peace. At the time, I believed him. Now, sitting in a quiet apartment filled with everything money could buy, and none of what I needed, I wondered if he'd been wrong all along. The next morning, I woke up to a message from Mark. Hey, about last night. Dad shouldn't have said that. He was out of line. No apology, just damage control. Still, it was more than I expected. You knew he'd say it, I typed back. You laughed. I didn't mean to. It's how we deal with him, laugh it off. I stared at the words until they blurred. That was the problem. Everyone in that house learned to laugh it off. The Turners didn't talk about pain. We buried it under silverware and Sunday manners. That afternoon, I went to the office. Helix Share's headquarters took up 2 floors of a glass building downtown. It was sleek, open, alive, the opposite of everything I'd grown up with. My assistant, Nolan, greeted me with a grin. You're trending again, boss. The Forbes clip hit 1 million views. Good, I said, forcing a smile. Maybe this time my family will actually read it. He laughed, not realizing the joke wasn't a joke. In the conference room, screens displayed metrics, investor pitches, and projections. My COO, Jasmine, briefed me on our next expansion, a merger proposal with a European startup. I nodded through it, but my mind wasn't in the numbers. It was still at that table, hearing the crack of a glass and the silence that followed. When the meeting ended, Jasmine lingered. You okay, fine? You sure you've been distant lately? And not in your usual genius in thought way. I exhaled. Do you ever feel like success is supposed to fix something that it never really does? She smirked. Every day. But that's why we keep building. We just get better at choosing what we build for. Her words stuck with me long after she left. That night, Clara and I walked through the park snow crunching under our boots. Lights shimmered on the trees, and kids threw snowballs near the fountain. I stopped watching them, the laughter, the freedom, the simplicity of joy that didn't need validation. Clara slipped her hand into mine. You know you don't have to keep revisiting that house to prove anything. You can build your own traditions. Maybe, I said, but I can't pretend that history didn't happen. It shaped me. She nodded. Then reshape it. The next few weeks blurred into meetings, interviews, and planning. Helix Share's IPO rumors spread, and Forbes ran another piece titled, From Failure to Founder Eli Turner's Unlikely Empire. The word failure made me flinch even when it was followed by praise. Then one afternoon I got an email. From my father. Eli saw the new article. You've done well. Proud of your accomplishments. Let's talk sometime. No apology, no warmth, just a transactional sentence like a business follow-up. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I opened the old Turner Construction website, the one I'd once offered to redesign for free. The layout was outdated, clunky, frozen in time. Just like him. I closed the laptop and sat in silence. For the first time in years, I didn't feel angry. I just felt sad for all the wasted time we'd spent trying to win a game no one needed to play. Outside, the city hummed with life horns, footsteps, the faint melody of a street musician playing Silent Night. Funny, I thought. Last Christmas, silence was the sound of humiliation. This year, it sounded almost like peace. And somewhere between those two kinds of silence, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't chasing revenge anymore. I was chasing redemption. When you grow up being compared to perfection, even breathing feels like a competition. That was my childhood in one sentence. Every meal, every report card, every small victory, all measured against the shining example of my brother Mark Turner. The man who could do no wrong. the favored son born to inherit everything. Dad used to say, "You and your brother are built differently, Eli. He's a leader. You're creative." The pause after that word always stung. Creative was his polite way of saying unreliable. By the time I hit 10, I'd learned to read the subtle cues, the proud smile Dad saved for Mark's achievements, the tight-lipped nod he gave me when I did well. The way Mom's praise always came with an asterisk, "We're proud of you too, sweetie, even if you're not like your brother." The truth is, I stopped wanting to be like Mark a long time ago, but I still wanted Dad to look at me the way he looked at him. I remember one summer Dad took Mark to the construction site, father-son time, he called it. I waited by the door, hard hat already on, boots a size too big. When I asked if I could come, he said, "You'd just get bored, son. This kind of work's not for dreamers." So I stayed home, sitting on the porch with my notebook, sketching buildings I'd never build. Even then, I knew what it felt like to be left out of the blueprint. When I hit college, the pressure turned brutal. Dad had insisted I study business management so you can actually be useful someday. I lasted one semester before switching to computer science. He didn't speak to me for weeks, insisting I had wasted my degree and my future. Mark graduated top of his class, of course. The same week he got his degree, Dad threw a party at the country club. I remember standing near the bar listening to their friends talk about how bright Mark's future was, how he was destined to take over the empire. When someone asked what I was studying, Dad answered for me. Something with computers. He's still figuring things out. That was the night I promised myself I'd build something so undeniable he couldn't ignore it even if he tried. Years later, when HelixShare finally launched, I didn't tell them. Not out of spite, out of self-preservation. I didn't want the doubt, the condescension, the patronizing, "That's nice, son." I wanted quiet. I wanted space to fail without witnesses. The first 2 years were chaos. I worked 16-hour days out of a rented studio apartment in Austin. The place was tiny cracked walls, flickering lights, a mattress on the floor. But it was mine. When I finally got my first investor call, a small fund out of San Diego, I almost didn't answer. I thought it was a scam. But that deal changed everything. Within months, HelixShare had exploded, millions of users, partnerships with big companies, even whispers about a potential IPO. And still I didn't call home. Maybe I wanted to show up one day and let my success do the talking. Or maybe I was still the kid with a notebook waiting for permission to belong. Success didn't erase old code. It just wrote a new layer over a deeply embedded virus. Last spring, when I saw the Forbes editor's email about a feature, I hesitated before replying. It felt too public, too vulnerable. But a part of me, the part still craving that look of pride, wanted it. When the issue came out, my phone exploded. Colleagues, investors, journalists, all congratulations. But not a single message from home. A week later, Mom finally called. Her tone was careful, as if she'd rehearsed. "We saw the article," she said. "Your father's very proud." "Is he?" I asked. "He didn't say it exactly, but you know how he is." I didn't respond. There was a pause, the kind that stretches until it becomes a truth neither side wants to say out loud. "You should come home for Christmas," she said finally. "It'll mean a lot to him." I wanted to laugh. "Mom, I've been coming home for 10 years. It hasn't meant a thing yet." She sighed softly. "People change, Eli." "Do they?" I almost said no, but instead I told her I'd think about it. When I hung up, I looked out the window of my office, 40 stories above the city, glass and sky everywhere. It hit me how far I'd come, and how far away I still was. That night I walked through the office alone. Rows of empty desks, screens flickering with lines of code, my world, my empire. Yet all I could hear was my father's voice echoing from years ago. "You just get bored. This kind of work's not for dreamers." Funny how the same words that used to break me had become fuel. The next day I met with my board to finalize a new acquisition. Jasmine walked me through the deal, a smaller tech firm struggling with funding. "If we buy them now, their AI model could double our market reach," she said. I nodded, signing the paperwork. It felt mechanical, transactional. Success had become routine, predictable, sterile. After the meeting, Jasmine lingered by the door. "You're flying home next week, right?" "Yeah," I said. "For Christmas." "Big step." I smirked. "Or a relapse," she laughed. "Just remember, some people can't handle your growth, Eli." "That's not your problem." Her words followed me to the airport a week later. The flight to Connecticut felt longer than usual. As the plane descended, I caught sight of the snow-covered suburbs below quiet uniform safe. The kind of world my parents had built and protected. The kind I'd never fit into. When I landed, Mom was waiting at arrivals, bundled in a thick red coat. She smiled like she was trying to bridge 10 years with one gesture. "You look good," she said. "So do you," I replied, meaning it. In the car, she filled the silence with small talk. The house renovations, Mark's promotion, Dad's cholesterol. She didn't mention Forbes, and I didn't bring it up. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw the house again, the same white colonial facade, the same perfect wreath on the door. But something felt different this time. It wasn't bigger than I remembered. It was smaller. I stepped out, the cold air biting my skin. Inside, I could already hear Dad's laugh, deep, confident, filling the space like it owned the walls. Mom touched my arm gently. "He's glad you're here." I smiled faintly. Let's hope he remembers that after dinner. As I stepped inside, I told myself I didn't care what happened this Christmas. But that was a lie. Because deep down, I knew I wasn't here to visit. I was here to finish something I started a long time ago. The Turner family Christmas dinner had always felt more like a performance than a celebration, and this year was no exception. The house looked like it had been pulled straight from a catalog, golden lights, wrapped around every window, perfectly symmetrical ornaments glinting under the chandelier, the long dining table set with the family's best china. Everything gleamed. Everything was hollow. Mom met me at the door with a bright, nervous smile. "Eli, darling, you made it." She took my coat before I could even respond. "Your father's in the dining room. He's been waiting." That word waiting carried more weight than she realized. I stepped into the room and saw him at the head of the table, glass in hand, laughing at something Mark had said. He looked older but not softer. The same posture, the same command, the same unspoken message. "This is my house, my table, my rules." "Look who's here," Dad announced. "The annual disappointment arrives." Mark smirked from his seat. "You brought your laptop this time? Or do you run the empire by phone now?" I forced a smile. Mostly telepathy. "Works faster than your construction deadlines, I hear." Dad chuckled the way men laugh when they think tension counts as masculinity. "That's my boys always competing. Take a seat, Eli. We've got roast mashed potatoes and your mother's famous apple pie." The words "your mother's famous apple pie" hit differently. It was the same pie she made every year, the same one I used to help her with, before Dad decided I was too distracted to be useful. Funny how food can carry ghosts. Dinner began with the usual toasts. Dad raised his glass. "To family, to success, and to the legacy we continue." His eyes flicked toward Mark, the unspoken "you" hanging in the air. Mom smiled at me, trying to soften the blow. "We're so proud of both our sons," she said quickly. Mark grinned. "Yeah, both of us billionaires now, right?" I took a sip of wine. "Only one of us pays his own bills." The room froze for half a second before the laughter started again. It wasn't joy. It was discomfort trying to disguise itself as humor. Dad cleared his throat. "So, Eli, how's what's it called again? That website company Helix Share?" I said evenly. "We're not a website. We're a platform ecosystem focused on decentralized collaboration tools. Our latest product integrates AI with cloud-driven project management." He blinked. "So, apps?" "Sure," I said. "Apps." Mark leaned in, smirking. "Still doesn't sound like real work to me. But hey, if people are paying for it, good for you." "People are," I said. "Millions of them." Mom stepped in, desperate to keep things light. "Oh, Eli, I saw your photo in that magazine, Forbes, was it? Such a lovely article." Dad's expression tightened. "We don't need to talk about magazines at dinner." I set my fork down. "You brought it up last time, remember? You said Forbes only puts people on the cover who have good PR teams." He looked at me across the table, that same steady stare I'd grown up with, the kind that made me feel like a mistake that needed fixing. I stand by that. Publicity isn't the same as success. Neither is inheritance, I said. The air snapped. Mark's grin vanished. Mom reached for her wine glass, pretending not to hear. Dad didn't blink. Careful, son. You sound ungrateful. I'm not ungrateful, I said quietly. I'm just aware. A long silence followed. The kind of silence that hums with all the words people are too proud to say. Finally, Mark broke it with a laugh. You two should just hug it out and be done. Dad ignored him. You think you're better than this family because you made some money, Eli. It's not about money, I said. It's about respect. He leaned forward. Respect is earned. I know, I said. That's why I stopped expecting it from you. For a moment, his mask slipped just a flicker of surprise, almost pain. Then it hardened again. If you came here to fight, you can leave. I exhaled slowly. I didn't come to fight. I came to eat dinner. But I guess that's not possible in this house without a hierarchy. Mom's voice cracked through the tension. That's enough. Both of you. She glanced at me, eyes pleading. Eli, please. Let's just have one nice Christmas. I looked around the table, the polished silverware, the perfect tablecloth, the expensive wine, the illusion of family harmony wrapped in tradition. Sure, I said finally. Let's have a nice Christmas. For the next hour, I played along. I asked about Mark's new promotion, about Mom's gardening club, about the neighbors. I even laughed when Mark told a story about Dad falling asleep at a charity event. But every smile felt borrowed. Every laugh felt like a foreign body, a piece of broken glass I couldn't swallow. When dessert came, the apple pie smelled like nostalgia and regret. Mom served everyone generous slices, but when she reached me, there wasn't enough left for a full piece. Oh, I must have miscalculated, she said softly. I smiled. It's fine. I'm used to crumbs. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Dad's chair creaked. That's enough, Eli. But this time I didn't back down. No, Dad. You know what's enough? Pretending that the way you've treated me all these years is normal. You call it tough love, but it's just cruelty with a nice label. The room went dead silent. Mark muttered, "Here we go." I stood, my voice steady now. You can give your speeches about legacy, you can keep your traditions, but don't call it family when it only works for the people who fit your script. I turned to leave. Then Dad said it again, not loud but sharp enough to slice through the air. Everyone got a gift except the loser. I froze in the doorway. For a second, I almost laughed. I turned back, meeting his eyes. You're right, I said quietly, but not for the reason you think. Then I walked away. Behind me, I heard the sound of Mom's quick, choked sob, like a door slamming in the distance. I didn't look back. Outside, the snow was falling again, covering the ground in a silence so deep it almost felt kind. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like running. I felt like something inside me had finally broken, and maybe breaking was the only way to start rebuilding. I woke up the next morning in the same guest room I'd slept in as a teenager. The wallpaper hadn't changed, pale blue, dotted with tiny sailboats, the kind of pattern my mother thought made the room timeless. The irony wasn't lost on me. Nothing about this house had changed. Not the smell of pine polish, not the way the floorboards creaked in the hallway, not the feeling of being 17 and invisible. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of laughter from downstairs. They were already up, already living another perfect Turner morning. By the time I came down, everyone was gathered around the living room, coffee cups in hand, fire crackling like it had been staged for a magazine shoot. My father was in his usual spot, by the tree glasses perched on the edge of his nose, sorting the mountain of color-coded presents. He loved this part, the theater of generosity, the spectacle of being the man who gave. Ah, he said, noticing me. The annual disappointment returns. Just in time for the performance, Mark added, grinning. His fiancée, Claire, perched beside him on the couch, smiled politely like someone witnessing a show she didn't quite understand. Mom handed me a mug of coffee. We've just started, she said gently. Sit, I did. Dad held up a red envelope. For Mark and Claire, a small contribution toward your wedding. You'll find the details inside. Mark beamed, kissing his fiancée on the cheek. You didn't have to, nonsense, Dad said. A family invests in its future. Next came another box. For your mother, a spa package in Napa. He winked. Because she deserves a little luxury. Mom smiled, pretending not to notice the way he emphasized. Then he reached for a small velvet case. For Rebecca. My confusion must have shown because I said, Rebecca. She couldn't make it, Mom explained quickly. You remember your cousin, the one modeling in New York? Of course. I forced a nod. Wouldn't want her to feel left out. Dad laughed. We take care of our family even from a distance. The pile of gifts began to shrink. A silver watch for my uncle. A vacation for my aunt. Checks for the housekeeper, the driver, even the gardener. Everyone's name was called except mine. I waited expression neutral while my heart pounded in my chest. Finally, Dad clapped his hands together. Well, he said cheerfully, that's everyone. Mom blinked, her smile faltering. William, what about... He waved her off. Oh, right. Eli. His tone was light mocking. Your gift must have been delayed. You know how shipping is these days. Laughter rippled around the room, awkward polite like people watching a car accident in slow motion. I didn't laugh. I just nodded, staring into my coffee cup. Of course. Supply chain issues. Always the villain. Mark shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. Come on, Dad. It's Christmas. Dad smiled, unfazed. Relax, he's fine. Eli's a big boy. Mom's voice wavered. William, please. But he kept going, oblivious or unwilling to stop. You know, he said, turning to the others, I read somewhere that not everyone needs gifts. Some people just need motivation. The words landed like shards of glass. I stood slowly, setting my mug down with care. Motivation. I repeated. That's what this is supposed to be. Dad looked at me, his face impassive. Call it what you want. I smiled. Small, sharp, controlled. Then I'll call it clarity. I don't need a gift from you, because I already gave myself one. Mark stood. Eli. But I cut him off. I wasn't the same kid who left here with a bruised ego, Dad. I came here to see if anything had changed. Clearly it hasn't. You keep pretending I'm still the kid who needed your approval. I don't. Not anymore. Mom's hand trembled around her cup. Eli, sweetheart. Please, no, I said, my voice calm but cutting. For once, let's not pretend this is normal. Let's not act like it's fine that every Christmas turns into some kind of humiliation game where I'm the punchline. Claire whispered something to Mark, but no one else moved. Dad leaned back, arms crossed. If you came here to throw your success in our faces, congratulations. You've done it. I shook my head. That's the thing, Dad. I didn't build my company to prove anything to you. I built it because you told me I couldn't. Silence. The kind that holds too much truth to break. Finally, Dad laughed, low, forced, brittle. You always did take things too personally. Yeah, I said. That's what happens when you raise someone to believe they're invisible. Mom's voice cracked. Eli, please. But I was done. I think I'll head out early, I said. Clearly, I'm just interrupting the tradition. I grabbed my coat, but before I turned to leave, I looked at my father one last time. You taught me how to survive without love, I said. And for that, I'll always be grateful. Then I walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard the sound of Mom's quick, choked sob like a door slamming in the distance. Outside, the air was freezing sharp against my lungs. I stood on the porch for a long time watching the snow fall, the glow of the house spilling onto the driveway like a spotlight on an empty stage. I drove away without looking back. My chest still felt tight, but the pain had changed its nature. It was less about his cruelty and more about the final, definitive absence of his love. There was no grand apology, no sudden moment of connection. There was only the knowledge that the man I'd spent my life trying to impress was simply incapable of the gesture I needed. That kind of closure doesn't come in a box. It comes when you realize the box was always empty. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from Clara. "You okay?" I typed back, "Better than I've ever been." It wasn't true yet. But for the first time, I knew it would be. As I walked to my car, the words I'd said inside replayed in my head, not as anger, as release. I'd spent my whole life waiting for my father to hand me a gift that would never come. Now I finally understood why. It wasn't because he didn't have one for me. It was because the only thing he could give me was the lesson I needed most, that some gifts aren't meant to be received. They're meant to be taken. The city was still asleep when I got back to my apartment. Dawn hadn't broken yet, just a faint blue glow bleeding through the blinds. I kicked off my boots, tossed my coat across the chair, and walked to the kitchen and grabbed a glass of water, downing it cold. I stood there in the quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's watching you. Helix Share was running on autopilot. I'd built it that way, systems layered on systems, teams working across time zones, deals finalizing while I slept. My empire didn't need me every second anymore, but that didn't stop me from feeling tethered to it, like it was the only thing keeping me upright. The Forbes issue lay open on the coffee table. The words blurred the way they always did when I looked at that picture, me in a tailored suit, standing in front of a glass office, chin-up, hands crossed. They'd called me the reluctant visionary. I'd called it a joke, because what they didn't write about was the loneliness that came with it. The long nights, the small betrayals, the people who saw your worth only after the world did. My phone buzzed. It was Clara. "I know you're awake. You never sleep after those dinners." I stared at the message before typing back. "You were right. I shouldn't have gone. You needed to. You just didn't need to stay." I smiled faintly. She always knew how to say the thing that pulled me back to earth. A new message came through, this time from Jasmine, my COO. "Urgent. You'll want to see this." Attached was a link to a finance blog. I opened it, half expecting another piece of market speculation about our valuation. Instead, the headline made my stomach tighten. "Turner Construction under investigation for fraudulent stock reporting. My father's company." I scrolled quickly. The article detailed an anonymous whistleblower claiming falsified expense reports, insider trading, misuse of employee retirement funds. The kind of thing that didn't just ruin a business, it ruined a name. My family's name. I sat back, the irony slicing through me. The man who'd spent his life calling me reckless, undisciplined, unfit for real business had been manipulating his own books. The empire he'd built was cracking from the inside. Clara called. "You saw it." I did, I said. "They're saying it's an internal whistleblower. Do you think it's true?" With him, I laughed quietly. "I think it's worse." She didn't answer right away. "You know this means they'll come to you, right? The media, the investors, everyone will want a statement. Your names are tied." I rubbed my temple. "I'm aware." "What are you going to do?" I didn't know yet. Part of me wanted to watch it burn, poetic justice, karma, whatever name you gave it. But another part of me, smaller and stubborn, couldn't shake the thought that this would destroy my mother too. By noon, the story had spread everywhere. Business networks, social media, local TV. A photo of my father leaving his office, flanked by lawyers, filled every feed. The comments ranged from shock to schadenfreude. The mighty Turner legacy finally cracks. Guess arrogance doesn't age well. At least the younger one seems to have brains. That last one made me sick. Jasmine walked into my office with a printout. "We've had 3 major investors call this morning. They're worried about brand contamination. The word Turner is trending, not in a good way." I nodded slowly. "Tell them to hold steady. This doesn't touch Helix Share." "Eli," she said carefully, "you know that's not entirely true. People don't separate bloodlines from brands. You're going to have to say something." I looked out the window. The city below buzzed cabs, crowds, endless motion. "Then I'll say the truth," I said finally. For once. The press conference was scheduled for the next morning. I spent the night rehearsing what I wouldn't say, the anger, the resentment, the satisfaction of watching his empire collapse. Instead, I focused on what needed to be said. When the cameras flashed and microphones pointed at me, I stood at the podium wearing the same gray suit I'd worn for my first investor pitch, a reminder of who I was before the headlines. I'm aware of the reports concerning Turner Construction, I began. While I have no involvement in that company, it carries my family name and that name matters to me. I paused. The room was silent. My father and I have had our differences professionally and personally. But I built Helix Share from a belief that transparency and integrity are non-negotiable. That belief hasn't changed. I will not defend what's indefensible, but I also won't celebrate another man's fall, even if that man is my father. The words hung there heavy final. When it ended, the questions came in a blur. Are you in contact with your family? Do you plan to assist with the investigation? Do you blame your father? I said nothing more. I didn't need to. That evening I got a call from an unknown number. I knew the voice instantly. Eli, my father said, you had no right. No right to what? Tell the truth. You just painted me as a criminal. You did that yourself, I said quietly. I just refused to lie for you. His voice broke slightly. You think you're better than me now with your fancy company and your magazine covers. But you're still a Turner. You'll always be one. Maybe I said. But I'm the kind of Turner who builds, not the kind who hides. He didn't reply. Just silence, a long, jagged silence that said everything words couldn't. Then the line went dead. I set the phone down, my hands shaking slightly. Clara was sitting by the window when I got home. She didn't say anything, just looked at me with that quiet understanding I'd come to rely on. He called, I said. I figured she replied. What did he say? Nothing I haven't heard before. She reached for my hand. And what did you say? I exhaled. That I'm done carrying his mistakes. For a long time we sat there, the city lights flickering outside, the hum of traffic faint beneath us. The Turner name might have been stained now, but for the first time I didn't feel like I was part of his shadow anymore. I'd stepped out of it. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real beginning of my empire. The office was quiet when I walked in that Monday morning. Too quiet. Usually by 8 a.m., Helix Share hummed like a living organism, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the low murmur of collaboration echoing through glass walls. But today the energy was different. Heavy, watchful. Every head lifted when I passed. Some smiled politely, others quickly looked away. News traveled fast. The scandal with my father had stained the air around me, even if I hadn't done anything wrong. Jasmine followed me into my office, closing the door behind her. You've seen the numbers, she asked, sliding a tablet across my desk. I scanned it quickly. Shares were down 4.2%. Not catastrophic, but enough to make investors nervous. They're afraid of association, she said. The Turner name is trending again, and not in an inspirational way. I leaned back, folding my hands. It's temporary. We'll stabilize. She nodded, though her eyes said she wasn't convinced. There's one more thing. A reporter from the Journal wants an exclusive interview. They're framing it as a rise above the legacy piece, meaning they want to turn my family into clickbait. Meaning they'll write it either way, she said. You might as well control the story. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to stay silent, to let the noise fade. But silence was what had kept me in my father's shadow for years. Set it up, I said finally. By the time the journalist arrived 2 days later, I'd already decided I wasn't going to play the part they wanted: the prodigal son, the tragic heir, the reluctant billionaire. I wasn't going to be anyone's symbol. Her name was Olivia Grant Sharp, composed the kind of person who saw more than you wanted her to. She began softly. You've built one of the fastest growing tech companies in the country. But you come from a very traditional background. How did that shape you? I smiled faintly. It taught me what not to repeat. Her pen froze. Meaning, my father believed success was about dominance, that you had to control everything and everyone to prove your worth. I learned that leadership is the opposite. It's about trust. She nodded, jotting something down. And now that his company is under investigation, do you feel vindicated? Vindicated? I repeated. No, just sad. Sad I spent half my life trying to earn his respect. Now I'm watching the world dismantle his reputation, and I can't even feel angry. That's what's sad." She studied me for a long moment. "You sound like someone who's forgiven him." I laughed quietly. "Forgiveness is too big a word. Let's just say I've stopped needing him to understand me." The interview lasted an hour. By the end, I could tell she wasn't getting the headline she wanted. No drama, no scandal, no bitter confessions, just the truth. When she stood to leave, she said something that stuck with me. "You know, most people who grow up in the shadow of someone powerful spend their lives trying to outshine them. But you've just moved the light." After she left, I sat there for a long time letting that line echo. Move the light. Maybe that was what Helix Share really was, my attempt to move the light somewhere new. That afternoon, I walked down to the engineering floor. My team looked up startled when they saw me. CEOs rarely made unannounced visits, especially not when the stock was dipping. "Morning," I said, smiling. "How's the new project integration?" A young developer named Matteo shrugged. "Code's solid, but we're still having sync issues with the AI module." "Show me." He blinked. "You want to see the code?" I grinned. "I built half of this platform myself. Let's take a look." For the next hour, I sat beside them, debugging, rewriting, laughing at their jokes, losing myself in the rhythm of creation, the same rhythm that had built my empire in the first place. For a moment, it didn't matter who my father was or what headlines were trending. Here, I wasn't the Turner son. I was just Eli, the coder, the builder, the guy who could still get his hands dirty. When I finally left the room, felt lighter. Jasmine caught me in the hallway. "You needed that," she said simply. I nodded. So did they. That night, I opened my laptop and started writing a letter, not for the press, not for investors, but for me. "Dad, I don't know what will happen next for you. Maybe you'll fight. Maybe you'll deny it. Maybe you'll go down swinging. I've stopped trying to predict your moves. But here's what I know: everything I am, you helped create, not because of your guidance, but because of your absence. You taught me that power without empathy always eats itself. You taught me that respect can't be demanded, it has to be earned. And you taught me most of all that legacy isn't what people inherit. It's what they build when no one's watching. If that's the only thing I ever got from you, it's enough." I didn't send it. I didn't need to. Instead, I closed my laptop, looked around my apartment, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the framed sketches from Helix Share's first prototypes, the small signs of a life built by my own choices, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. The next morning, the journal piece went live. The headline wasn't what I expected. "He built an empire and chose humanity over vindication." The photo was candid, me walking through the office, sleeves rolled up, looking down at a screen, smiling faintly, not the distant CEO on the Forbes cover. The comments were different this time. Not just admiration or curiosity. Respect. And somewhere I hoped my father saw it not as a victory, but as a lesson he'd never learned, that sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is not to conquer, but to let go. 3 weeks after the article went viral, I got a call from my mother. I almost didn't answer. For years, our conversations had been transactional reminders, invitations, shallow updates about relatives I didn't care to know. But this time, her voice sounded different. "Eli," she said quietly, "your father wants to have dinner." I laughed short and sharp. "Is this before or after he burns the house down?" "Please," she said. "Just come. No photographers, no press. Just family." The word hung in the air, family. It used to mean home. Now it felt like a negotiation. Still, something in her tone stopped me from hanging up. Maybe curiosity. Maybe that small, stubborn part of me that still wanted to believe redemption was possible. The dinner was at the old Turner house, not the mansion I grew up in, but the smaller lake property my parents had retreated to since the investigation began. When I arrived, the driveway was half covered in snow. No guards, no guests, no luxury cars lined up like trophies. Just a modest porch light flickering in the cold. Mom greeted me at the door. She looked older, not fragile, just human. The armor of status and perfection had cracked. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, ushering me inside. Neither was I. The dining room was smaller than I remembered. The table is only set for 3. No fine china, no over-decorated centerpieces, just baked salmon roasted vegetables and a simple berry pie cooling on the counter. Simple, unfamiliar. Then I saw him. My father. He was sitting at the far end of the table, no tie, no bravado. His shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. The last time I'd looked into his face, I saw pride laced with cruelty. Now I saw fatigue, the kind that comes when a man realizes his empire was built on sand. "Eli," he said, nodding. "You look well." "I am," I replied evenly. "You," he hesitated. "Managing." We sat. The silence was thick, punctuated only by the sound of the fire popping in the hearth. Mom tried to bridge it. "The lake looks beautiful this time of year, doesn't it? You can almost see the stars reflected in the water." "Sure," I said, though my eyes stayed on him. Finally, he put down his fork. "I suppose there's no use pretending this isn't awkward." "No," I said, "but pretending's what we've always done best." He winced just slightly. "You always did have your mother's tongue." "No," I said quietly. "I just learned to use it when I got tired of being ignored." He nodded slowly. "Fair." Mom stood to pour more wine, trying to smooth over the tension, but it was already spilling across the table. "I read that article about you," he said finally. "The one in the journal. Didn't expect you to." "It was good," he admitted. "Too good, maybe. You said things I should have said years ago." I raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" He looked down at his plate. "That power isn't controlled. That leadership isn't fear." The room went still. He sighed. "The investigation's not over. They'll probably find enough to take the company apart." "But I didn't ask you here to talk about that. Then why am I here?" He looked up. His eyes were tired but clear. "Because I wanted to apologize." I froze. Of all the things I expected that night, that word was the least likely. He took a deep breath. "I thought making you tough would protect you. I thought dismissing you would light some fire that made you fight harder. I never realized it would just make you disappear from me." He looked at his hands. "When you showed up with that magazine, I wasn't angry because you embarrassed me. I was angry because you reminded me what I could have been if I'd built something honest." Mom sat silently, her eyes shining. I didn't speak. I didn't trust my voice yet. He continued, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know I see you now. Not as a disappointment, not as the loser, as the man who became everything I failed to be." The words hit me harder than I wanted them to. I leaned back, breathing slowly. "You think that fixes anything?" "No," he said, "but it's the truth." The honesty in his tone, shaky, uneven, but real, broke something open in me. Years of bitterness, of proving, of fighting shadows that weren't even there anymore, started to loosen. "I didn't build HelixShare to get back at you," I said finally. "I built it because I wanted to know what it felt like to be respected by anyone." "You earned it," he said quietly. "Even from me." We sat in silence for a while. The fire burned lower. Outside, snow drifted across the frozen lake. Mom broke the stillness. "Dessert?" she asked softly. We both laughed, small, tired, but genuine. She smiled, relieved to see us human again. After dinner, my father walked me to the porch. The air was cold enough to sting. "You know," he said, staring out at the lake, "I always thought legacy meant leaving something behind. But I think it's more about leaving someone better than yourself." I turned to him. "Maybe that's the first thing we've ever agreed on." He extended his hand. For a moment, I considered refusing just to prove I still could. But then I took it. His grip was weaker than I remembered, but it was steady. As I drove back to the city, headlights cutting through the dark, I realized something that startled me. I didn't hate him anymore. Not because he'd earned forgiveness, but because I didn't need his approval to define my worth. For the first time, he wasn't the man who withheld my gift. He was just a man, broken, remorseful human. And maybe that was the only gift that ever really mattered. The following week, the board meeting felt different. For the first time since the scandal broke, I wasn't walking into the room as someone defending his name. I was walking in as someone defining it. Helix Shares conference room stretched high above the city skyline walls of glass reflecting the morning light. My team sat around the long oak table papers spread out screens flickering with livestock data. Jasmine sat at the far end, her expression steady but alert. "Morning," I said, sliding into my seat. "Let's get started." We went through the agenda: quarterly projections, expansion plans, investor concerns. The numbers were strong, better than anyone predicted after the headlines. But as always, the conversation veered toward image. Eli said, "Robert Kane, one of the oldest board members, the Turner name is still trending. The market sees you as unpredictable, brilliant, yes, but risky." I met his gaze. "Risk is what built this company, Robert." He nodded slowly. "True. But now we need reassurance, stability. Investors are asking about succession plans, shares, and control." There it was. The real reason for the meeting. Jasmine shot me a look, a silent warning. I smiled faintly. "If you're suggesting I step back to make the company look safer, that won't happen." Kane raised his hands. "No one's suggesting you step aside. But perception is power. You know that better than anyone." He wasn't wrong. But what he didn't understand was that I'd stopped living for perception the moment I walked out of that Christmas dinner. "Then let's change perception," I said. "Not by hiding, but by leading differently." I stood walking toward the wall where a new model of Helix Shares' next division was displayed, Helix Connect, a platform designed to bring small business owners together for mentorship, funding, and collaboration. "This," I said, pointing to the screen, "is what defines us. Not a scandal. Not stock prices. Not my last name. We build bridges where others build walls." The room was quiet. Then Jasmine spoke. "He's right. The market doesn't need a safe company. It needs a human one." By the time the meeting ended, the tone had shifted. For once, I wasn't fighting for control, I was setting direction. That afternoon, I got a call from Clara. "You've been trending again," she said. "Let me guess. Another meme of me looking angry in a suit." "Not this time. People are calling you the CEO who chose integrity over empire." I laughed. "That's a generous exaggeration." "Maybe," she said, "but it's also true." That night, I stopped by her apartment, something I hadn't done in weeks. Her place was warm, cluttered, alive in a way mine never was. A pot of stew simmered on the stove, the smell of thyme and garlic filling the air. "You look exhausted," she said, handing me a bowl. "Just another day of keeping the empire upright." "Empire," she repeated, smirking. "Funny how you keep calling it that." "It's ironic," I said. "You spend your whole life trying to build something bigger than your past. Then one day you realize the past is the foundation you built it on." She leaned against the counter, studying me. "You saw your dad, didn't you?" I nodded. "Dinner at the lake house. And he apologized." She blinked. "He did, yeah." I didn't believe him at first. But he meant it. For once, he didn't sound like the man I used to know. Just a man who'd finally stopped lying to himself. Clara smiled softly. "Sounds like you both grew up." Maybe I said, but I think I just stopped needing to prove him wrong. She walked closer, resting a hand on my shoulder. Not every story needs a villain." "I know," I said. "But some villains become teachers in the end." Later that week, I hosted a small gathering at the office, employees, partners, even a few competitors who'd become allies. It wasn't a party. It was a statement. The message was simple. Helix Share was moving forward. During my speech, I said something that wasn't on the cue cards. I built this company because I believed connection could heal what ambition breaks. For years, I thought proving myself was about being the smartest person in the room. Now I know it's about being the kind of person who doesn't need to be. Applause filled the room, but all I heard was the echo of my father's voice from that Christmas table. "Everyone gets a gift except the loser." Funny how one sentence could define a lifetime, and how a lifetime could rewrite it. Later that night, Jasmine approached me holding her phone. "You might want to see this." On the screen was a financial update: Turner Construction officially filed for bankruptcy. My throat tightened. "They're auctioning off assets," she said quietly. It's over. I nodded slowly. Yeah, it is. Are you okay? I don't know, I admitted. But it feels like something that needed to end finally did. I also heard Mark is trying to sell his condo quickly to cover some debts. After she left, I stood by the window overlooking the city. The snow had started again, soft flakes spiraling in the glow of the streetlights. I thought about my father, not the man who mocked me, but the one who had finally said, I see you. I thought about the empire he'd lost, and the one I was still building brick by brick, mistake by mistake. In that moment, I realized something simple but profound. Success wasn't about proving people wrong. It was about proving yourself right, quietly, steadily, with integrity and tact. When the tables finally turned, I hadn't crushed him. I hadn't needed to, because the truth was, I'd never been his opponent. I was his reflection, the version of him that chose to build differently, and for the first time in my life, that felt like victory enough. The morning after the bankruptcy hit the news, I woke up to a storm of messages. Emails, voicemails, text notifications piling on top of each other like falling bricks. Most of them weren't condolences, they were opportunities. Investment firms wanted to buy Turner Construction's remaining assets. Real estate companies wanted to negotiate for the lake house. Even journalists disguised as friends of the family wanted comments on my father's fall from grace. I didn't respond to any of them. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone buzzing in my hand, and stared out the window at the city blanketed in fresh snow. Everything looked calm from up here, but I knew better. Chaos always found a way to dress itself in silence. By the time I got to the office, Jasmine was already waiting. She looked exhausted, hair pulled back, coffee in one hand, her tablet glowing with updates. They've frozen most of your father's accounts, she said. It's bad, Eli. Some of the pension funds might not recover. I closed my eyes. He'll never admit it, but he's done. She hesitated before adding, he might not have to. There's something else. I looked up sharply. What do you mean? They traced a portion of the stock fraud back to one of the subsidiary firms, the same one that invested in Helix Shares' seed round. My heart dropped. That was 10 years ago. Doesn't matter. You're technically listed as a beneficiary through an old contract. It's nothing criminal, but you'll be dragged into it by association. Of course, the past always finds its way back when you least need it to. Prepare the legal team, I said. We'll handle it quietly. Jasmine nodded, then lowered her voice. There's more. Your father's lawyer called this morning. He wants to meet. I stared at her. For what? He didn't say. Just that it's urgent. I agreed to meet that evening, mostly out of curiosity. The lawyer was waiting in a small downtown cafe, the kind of place my father would have sneered at for being too modest. He was an older man, thin, with a tired expression, and the air of someone who'd been holding too many secrets for too long. Turner, he greeted standing as I approached. Thank you for coming. Let's skip the formalities, I said, taking a seat. What's this about? He slid a thick envelope across the table. Your father asked me to give you this if things went south. I didn't touch it. What is it? His final letter, the lawyer said softly. And his will. I froze. His will, he's not... He's alive, the lawyer assured, but he's changed. He said he wanted you to read it privately, before the public proceedings begin. I hesitated, then took the envelope. It felt heavier than paper should. When I got home, I opened it slowly. The handwriting inside was his bold, precise, almost militaristic Eli. If you're reading this, it means I've finally lost everything: the company, the money, the illusion. Maybe that's what it took for me to see the truth. I spent my life measuring worth by what I could control. You measured yours by what you could build. That's the difference between us. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, and I won't ask for it. What I will ask is that you take what's left of my estate, the remaining shares, the house by the lake, and do something useful with it. Something good. Don't let my name be the last word on the Turner legacy. For all my failures, you are the one thing I got right. Take care of your mother. She believed in me long after she shouldn't have. And when you look at yourself in the mirror, know that I'm proud of you even if I never said it when it mattered. Dad, I read it twice, then a third time. Every sentence felt like a blow I hadn't braced for. For years I'd fantasized about hearing those words. But now that they were here, ink on paper, distant and final, they didn't feel like victory. They felt like the aftermath of a war I hadn't realized I'd already won. The next day, I met with my mother at a small bakery near her new apartment. She looked tired, but peaceful, a woman who'd finally stopped performing for the world. "I heard you got something from your father," she said, stirring her coffee. I nodded. "A letter, and his will." Her eyes glistened. "He's been writing that for months. Said it was the only honest thing he's ever done. He wants me to take what's left." She smiled faintly. "Then take it. Not for him, for you. Make something that matters." I later called Clara. "I'm setting up a foundation with the money," I told her. "The Turner Fellowship. I want to fund the founders who are told they can't make it." "That's beautiful, Eli," she said softly, turning the wound into wisdom. Later that afternoon, I went back to my office and called an emergency meeting. When the team gathered, I laid out the plan. "We're launching a new initiative," I said. "A foundation under Helix Share the Turner Fellowship. It'll provide grants to young entrepreneurs who've been dismissed or underestimated. No background checks for pedigree, no bias for degrees, just ideas and grit." The room buzzed with energy. Jasmine looked at me, eyes soft. "That's what you wish someone had done for you." "Exactly," I said. "Let's make sure no one else has to earn their worth the hard way." Over the next few weeks, the fellowship announcement spread across the business world. The media called it a redemption move, the son rebuilding what the father destroyed. But it wasn't about that. It was about peace. The kind of peace you buy, not with money, yet with meaning. One evening as I walked through the empty office, I stopped by the framed Forbes cover on the wall. The headline that once felt like triumph now just looked small. Success had stopped being about recognition the moment I stopped chasing it. That night I drove back to the lake house one last time. The property was quiet, the snow undisturbed. Inside everything was just as I remembered: the long table, the cold fireplace, the echo of voices that would never return. I left his letter on the mantel beside a photograph of us from years ago, me as a kid holding a toy plane, him standing behind me, proud and smiling. Then I whispered into the stillness, "You were wrong about gifts, Dad. Some of us had to build our own." As I walked back outside, the snow began to fall harder, soft flakes landing on my coat like tiny ghosts of the past. The empire I had built wasn't just code and contracts anymore. It was made of choices, forgiveness, integrity, and the quiet decision to keep building even when no one believed you could. And for the first time I realized peace wasn't the absence of conflict. It was the moment you stopped needing to win. Spring arrived earlier than usual that year. The snow melted fast, leaving the streets slick and shining, the city humming again after months of gray quiet. For the first time in years, I wasn't dreading the season's return. I'd stopped waiting for things to collapse. I'd stopped expecting ghosts to follow me home. Helix Share was thriving. The Turner Fellowship had drawn international attention. Stories of young founders who'd been turned away by investors, now getting their chance, filled my inbox daily. I read every one of them. Each story felt like a fragment of something I'd once needed, proof that someone believed in me before I proved myself. But beneath the steady rhythm of progress, I felt something stirring, a restlessness like unfinished business still waiting to be addressed. That feeling led me back to the house I hadn't seen since Christmas. Not the lake house. The house. The one where I grew up, a structure that had once symbolized everything wrong between us. It was up for sale now, listed among other bankrupt properties under my father's estate. Seeing it on paper had made something twist in my chest. There it was, the place where it had all started, priced and packaged for strangers. I drove out to see it on a Friday afternoon. The gates were open, the for sale sign tilted from the wind. The yard was overgrown ivy curling over the brick facade. It didn't look like the fortress of my childhood anymore. It looked like a memory that had given up pretending to be alive. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside, and the air hit me stale, still carrying faint traces of cologne dust and old ambition. The grand staircase, once polished to a mirror shine, was dull. The chandelier hung crooked. The marble floor that my mother used to obsess over was chipped near the baseboards. I walked room to room, my footsteps echoing in spaces that used to overflow with noise: Christmas dinners, business meetings, fights behind closed doors. In the dining room, the long oak table still stood. I ran my hand over the surface. I could almost hear his voice again. Everyone gets a gift except the loser. It should have made me angry, but it didn't. Not anymore. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened a picture I'd taken at last year's company retreat. My team, laughing by a campfire, holding mugs of coffee, faces lit by warmth and trust. That was my family now. Not perfect, not bound by blood, but by belief. I sat down in one of the old chairs, breathing in the silence. I thought about all the years I'd spent chasing what this house represented: approval, power, legacy, and how in the end, none of it had ever belonged to me. I stood and looked out the window. The garden beyond was unrecognizable. Overgrown hedges, a broken swing, the faint outline of a bench where I used to sit with my mother before dinner when things still felt safe. I decided right then that I wasn't going to let strangers take this place and turn it into another monument of decay. I called Jasmine. "Hey," she said, answering on the first ring. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said, "but I'm buying the house." There was a pause. "The house. That house." "Yes, Eli, I know what it is, but it's time to build something new on top of it." 2 weeks later, the sale went through. Legally, it was simple, just numbers and signatures. Emotionally, it felt like rewriting history. When the deed arrived, I sat at my desk and stared at it for a long time. Owner Eli Turner. The name looked right there. Not because I needed to possess it, but because I was ready to redefine it. Over the next few months, the renovation began. I hired a small local crew, not a luxury firm. I wanted the place rebuilt by real hands, the kind of people my father used to ignore. Every weekend I visited the site. The walls came down, sunlight poured through spaces that had been dark for decades. The echoes of the past were replaced by the sound of hammer saws and laughter. By late summer, the house didn't look like the one I'd grown up in. It was brighter, warmer, simpler. No marble, no grand chandeliers, no gold accents. Just wood, glass, and light. On the last day of construction, I stood in what used to be the dining room, the same spot where my father once humiliated me. Now it was an open studio space with wide windows overlooking the yard. I decided this room wouldn't host dinners or corporate events. It would host workshops, free mentoring sessions for young founders in the fellowship program. A house that once symbolized exclusion would now be a place for opportunity. The first workshop was small 12 participants, one long reclaimed wood table, coffee cups instead of wine glasses. As I spoke to them about leadership, I caught a reflection in the window, a faint, ghostly image of my younger self sitting silently at the end of a different table, waiting for a gift that would never come. And just like that, I realized something. That gift had finally arrived. Not wrapped in gold paper, not handed down by a father trying to prove control, but built piece by piece from everything I had endured. Later that evening, after everyone left, I walked through the empty halls again. The air smelled like cedar and paint. The house hummed with new life. I stopped at the doorway and whispered, "It's done." Maybe I was talking to him, maybe to myself. Before I left, I pinned the original Forbes cover on the inside of a closet door, hidden but still there. A reminder. Not of wealth, not of revenge, but of the day. I stopped being defined by anyone else's story. As I locked the door behind me, I thought about the strange symmetry of it all. The boy who once walked out of this house empty-handed was now walking away, having rebuilt it not to erase the past but to transform it. The house that had raised me through pride, broken me through cruelty, and haunted me through silence had finally become something else. Home. Not because of what it held, but because of what it no longer did. It was Christmas again. A full year since the dinner that changed everything. This time, the snow came softly, the kind that seemed to muffle the whole world. No chaos, no noise, just stillness. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the cuffs of my shirt, wondering how strange it felt to no longer dread the holidays. The house I'd rebuilt, the same one that once held so much bitterness, was glowing with light. Strings of white bulbs draped across the porch, soft jazz playing from the speakers, the smell of cinnamon and baked apples drifting from the kitchen. It didn't feel like the Turner mansion anymore. It felt like life. I'd invited a small group, a few colleagues, some fellows from the foundation, Jasmine and her husband Clara, of course, and my mother. She had insisted on bringing a pie she baked herself. I didn't argue. The doorbell rang just as I was pouring the first glass of wine. I opened the door to find her standing there, cheeks flushed from the cold, wrapped in a long coat. She smiled in that soft, knowing way only mothers can. I almost didn't recognize the place, she said. "It's beautiful, Eli." I smiled. "It's different, yeah." She stepped inside, her eyes tracing the warm wooden floors, the tall windows, the laughter drifting from the living room. "Your father would have loved this." I hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe. In his own way." I heard Mark had taken a small job upstate, finally building his own life far from the Turner name. I hoped he found his peace, too. Mom set the pie down on the counter, glancing around. "He sent me something for you." I froze. "What?" She reached into her purse and handed me a small square box, simple, wrapped in brown paper. My name was written across the top in his unmistakable handwriting. "He passed away last month," she said quietly. "Heart failure. It was peaceful. He told me to give you this when you were ready." I stood there for a long moment, the sound of laughter from the other room fading behind the hum in my ears. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just breathed. After she joined the others, I took the box into the study, the same space that had once been my father's office, now filled with books, sunlight, and the quiet hum of peace. I sat at the desk and unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a pocket watch. Old silver scratched at the edges. I recognized it immediately. He used to carry it every day when I was a kid, checking it before every meeting, every dinner, every argument. But it wasn't the watch that stopped me. It was what was engraved inside the lid. "For the man who finally learned time can't measure worth." I stared at it for what felt like forever. Then I laughed, not bitterly, not painfully, just softly, because it made sense. In his own clumsy way, my father had given me the one thing he never knew how to give before: closure. When I walked back into the living room, the house was full of warmth. Jasmine was telling a story about the early days of Helix Share. Clara was laughing, and one of the fellows, a young woman named Naomi, was talking about her new app connecting low-income families to medical care. Clara caught my eye. "You okay?" I walked over. She squeezed my hand gently. "This is it, Eli. The real ending." I pulled her close. "No," I said, kissing her forehead. "This is the beginning." We gathered around the table, the new one, not the long oak slab that once carried humiliation, but one I'd built myself with local carpenters. Every chair was mismatched on purpose. No hierarchies. No head of the table. When everyone had found a seat, Jasmine raised her glass. "To Eli," she said, "for teaching us that revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like rebuilding." The room erupted in cheers. I lifted my glass, but said nothing. I didn't need to. Later that night, after everyone left and the lights dimmed, I walked out to the porch. The snow had thickened, blanketing the world in white. I took the pocket watch from my jacket and flipped it open again. The second hand ticked softly, steady and patient. For so many years, I'd thought revenge was about balance, about making the people who hurt you feel what you felt. But standing there under the soft hush of winter, I finally understood. True revenge isn't about payback. It's about freedom. It's about living well without the bitterness that once owned you. It's about turning the wound into wisdom. I looked back through the window at the house, The laughter, the glow of the Christmas lights, and thought about my father, about the boy he raised, and the man I became in spite of him, and maybe also because of him. He'd spent his life measuring success in money and control and reputation. But I'd learned something simpler, that legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you leave within. As I closed the watch and slipped it back into my pocket, the clock on the wall struck midnight. Christmas Day. The world was quiet, blank, and open, a clean slate. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the loser in anyone's story. I felt like a man who had finally written his own. And that was the last gift. The one no one could ever take away. If you've ever been the one left out, if you've ever sat at a table and felt unseen, know this: your story isn't over. You can build your own table, your own empire, your own peace. If this story found you tonight, leave a comment and tell me what you'd build when no one believes you can. And if you're still waiting for your turn, trust me,